The woman who once ruled Hollywood with sharp words and clever deals began to feel her world slipping away. She had sent men to break Keanu, to leave him in the snow, but it was her own power that was now breaking. Her phone rang less often. Meetings that used to be hers were canceled or handed to others. People smiled at her face but turned cold once she walked away. She could feel it everywhere. The silent shift, the slow fall. She tried to fight back. She told stories. She whispered. Lies. She painted herself as a victim. But the more she spoke, the weaker she sounded because across the city was Keanu. Calm, silent, untouched by her words. While she shouted, he remained still, and people began to see the difference. They saw desperation in her eyes and peace in his. They saw noise in her and strength in him. The two men who had once laughed as they tied him in the snow now avoided everyone. They no longer boasted, they no longer joked. The silence had turned on them as well. They feared every look, every whisper, wondering if people knew. Their faces carried guilt, their shoulders bent under a weight they could not shake. They thought they had buried Keanu that night, but it was themselves they had buried. Meanwhile, Keanu moved forward. His body healed. His bruises faded, but his silence stayed. He did not chase revenge. He did not name his enemies. He didn't need to. Every step he took back into his work, every quiet act of kindness became heavier than 1,000 accusations. Crew members told stories of him helping carry equipment. Actors spoke of him waiting in the cold with them rather than sitting in warmth. These little stories spread, and together they built something unbreakable. Hollywood loves power, but it also loves a story. And Keanu's story became one told in hushed tones. The man left in the snow who walked back without a word. The woman's story, however, twisted into something else. People no longer admired her ambition. They feared her cruelty. They whispered her name only with caution. They avoided her as though her shadow could stain them. One night she entered a party, a room where once she would have been the center. But the crowd shifted away. Conversations died as she passed. Faces turned politely, then quickly back to others. She tried to laugh, to charm, but her voice rang hollow in the silence. And then Keanu walked in, quiet as always, not seeking the crowd, but the room tilted toward him anyway. Smiles lit up, hands reached out. People leaned in just to hear his few gentle words. She watched from across the room, her chest tightening with anger and fear. Because without even trying, he had taken what she had fought her whole life to hold. Her empire of power cracked. Producers stopped calling. Actors refused her offers. Directors looked past her. The men she once sent were now ghosts, fading into corners, ashamed to even be seen. And still Keanu said nothing. His silence had done what no lawsuit, no scandal, no revenge could do. It had stripped her of everything. For her, the silence became unbearable. She could not fight what she could not touch. She had expected fury. She had prepared for screams. She thought he would strike back so she could strike harder, but he had denied her even that. He had given her nothing. No words, no fight, no name, only silence. And that silence grew heavier every day until it crushed her. Keanu, on the other hand, rose higher, not because he wanted to, but because people lifted him there. His humility drew them, his calmness inspired them. He became a symbol not of revenge but of strength. People said he could not be broken, not by fists, not by ropes, not by the cold, not by betrayal. And the more they said it, the more true it became in Hollywood. Reputations rise and fall like the seasons. But hers was winter now, long and unending, and his was spring, alive and fresh. His silence was like a mirror, showing the world her cruelty and his kindness without ever needing words. The fall of the powerful woman was not loud, it was quiet. Slow, like ice cracking beneath her feet until she was swallowed by the very silence she had tried to use against him. The two men who had obeyed her slipped into obscurity, their faces remembered only in shame. And Keanu? He walked forward, quiet as always, stronger than before. The revenge was not in anger, not in violence, not in exposure. The revenge was that he did nothing at all, and still, the world turned against them. They had tried to erase him, but they had erased themselves instead, and the man they thought broken had become unshakable. His silence had carried him higher than any scream ever could. That was the fall of the powerful. Destroyed not by force, not by words, but by silence. And it was Keanu's silence that shook Hollywood to its core. Keanu never told the story of that night. He never described the snow, the ropes, the pain, or the men who left him behind. He did not need to. The silence spoke for him. People around him filled in the details with their own imagination, and in every version he became stronger. Some said he had crawled for miles with blood on his hands. Some said the wolves had circled but never dared to touch him. Some said he walked into the city like a ghost, calm and unbroken. The truth did not matter anymore. What mattered was the man who stood before them now, silent and steady. The woman who had once sent men against him found herself forgotten. Her name, once heavy in meetings, now carried no weight. Her empire of influence collapsed in slow silence. She was still there, still trying, still smiling too brightly, but no one cared. Her words could not compete with his silence. The two men who had tied him up disappeared into the shadows of Hollywood, no longer welcome, no longer trusted. Their names faded while his rose higher. And all this happened without Keanu saying a single word. On film sets, he carried himself as he always had, quiet, respectful, and kind. He offered food to crew members who had none. He stayed behind after shooting to help carry equipment. He shook hands with extras as if they were stars. These small acts made their way through Hollywood like sparks in dry grass. Stories of his kindness burned brighter than the scandal of his suffering. People loved him not for the mystery, but for the man he was every day. When asked by interviewers about his strength, he never spoke of revenge. He spoke instead of gratitude. He said he was thankful for the chance to live, thankful for the people who still believed in kindness. His words were simple, his tone calm. He never spoke about the woman, never spoke about the men, never even confirmed what had happened in the snow. That silence left a space, and in that space the world built him into a legend. For those who tried to break him, it was the worst punishment of all. They were erased by silence while he was lifted by it. Their names withered while his grew eternal. He had shown something rare in Hollywood, a man who did not fight for revenge, a man who did not shout his pain. Instead, he let silence carry. His truth and silence destroyed his enemies more completely than anger ever could. People began to say his silence was not just survival, it was philosophy. They said it was the strongest weapon in a noisy world. Some young actors looked at him and saw not just a movie star, but a guide. They admired how he lived without arrogance, how he carried pain without bitterness. They wanted to be like him, calm, kind, and unbroken. His silence had become something bigger than himself. It had become a lesson. In Hollywood, every scandal fades, every story is replaced by the next. But his story never faded, because he never told it. The mystery lived on, carried in whispers. In quiet admiration, people repeated it at parties, on sets, in studios, always with wide eyes. He was left in the snow, beaten, tied, but he came back without a word. And every time the story was told, his legend grew. Years later, when people spoke of him, they did not speak of the men who hurt him, or the woman who tried to break him. They were forgotten, swallowed by their own silence. They spoke instead of Keanu, the man who turned pain into peace, the man who made silence stronger than noise, the man who saved himself and others not with fists, but with dignity. And in that silence there was victory, not just for him, but for everyone who ever believed that strength does not always shout. Sometimes strength is quiet. Sometimes it is walking out of the snow with your head high and your mouth closed. Sometimes it is letting the world see the truth without you ever speaking it. Keanu Reeves became more than an actor in those days. He became a symbol. He showed that even when left beaten and tied in the cold, a man can rise, a man can survive. Without hatred, a man can choose silence, and that silence can shake the world. The revenge was never revenge at all. It was life. It was dignity. It was moving forward when others wanted him to fall back. It was smiling when others expected anger. It was kindness when others had shown cruelty. And that was the true ending. Keanu Reeves walking forward, silent, unbroken, his life itself becoming the loudest answer of all. Keanu stood inside the plane, the sound of the roaring wind filling his ears as the hatch opened wide to the sky. The world outside looked endless, a wide ocean of blue mixed with soft white clouds that stretched in every direction. His heart raced, not with fear but with excitement. This was supposed to be one of the greatest days of his life. He had been training for months, waiting for this moment when he would finally take the leap, feel the sky around him, and experience the thrill of freefall. His body trembled, not from nerves, but from the rush of adrenaline that came with the thought of what was about to happen. Behind him, his so-called friends laughed and clapped him on the back. "You'll do great, Keanu," one of them shouted, giving him a push forward. Another leaned in and said, "Don't think too much. Just enjoy the fall." Their words sounded cheerful, but there was something strange about their smiles. Keanu didn't notice it at the time, too lost in the anticipation of the dive. He thought they were supporting him, cheering him on like good friends should. What he didn't know was that those smiles hid something cruel. The instructor gave the final safety signal, reminding him of the steps he had practiced again and again. Pull the cord, count the seconds, and then enjoy the parachute ride down to Earth. Simple, safe, nothing to worry about. Keanu repeated the steps in his mind, confident that everything would go as planned. He had checked his gear earlier, or so he thought. He had trusted his friends when they distracted him with jokes while he tightened the straps. Trust, that was his mistake. The plane soared higher, climbing into the sky. Keanu took deep breaths, steadying himself. Below, the world looked like a patchwork of green fields, silver rivers, and small towns scattered like toys. From up here, everything looked peaceful. It was hard to imagine that danger could exist in such beauty. He stretched his arms, feeling the straps of the parachute against his shoulders. The weight was reassuring. He was ready, or at least he believed he was. His friends moved closer to the hatch, some pretending to stretch, others laughing too loudly. One of them whispered something Keanu didn't catch, and the others chuckled. He thought nothing of it. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe they were joking to lighten the mood. He smiled, unaware of the truth. In that moment, he trusted them more than anyone else. After all, they had trained together, eaten together, spent countless hours preparing for this jump. Why would he ever think they wanted him harmed? The pilot's voice crackled through the headset, announcing that they were at the right altitude. The air grew colder, sharper. Keanu's breath formed small clouds in front of his face as he stepped toward the open hatch. The rushing wind hit him like a wall, loud and powerful, pulling at his clothes, whipping his hair. His heart pounded, so hard it felt like the sound filled his chest. He was standing on the edge of the world, ready to fly. He turned to his friends one last time. They gave him thumbs up, their grins wide, their eyes strangely bright. He nodded back, unaware of the darkness hidden behind those looks. To him, this was just another thrilling adventure, another chance to prove his courage. To them, it was something else entirely. A twisted plan already set in motion. Taking one last deep breath, Keanu stepped forward and leaped into the sky. For the first few seconds, it was everything he had dreamed of. The freedom of falling, the endless blue, stretching above him, the ground far below shrinking and rising all at once. His arms spread wide, the wind rushing past his body, and he felt alive in a way he never had before. In that instant, nothing else mattered. He was weightless, powerful, unchained. But behind him, still inside the plane, his friends leaned forward and watched with greedy eyes. Their laughter echoed faintly in the distance, lost to the roar of the sky. They thought their secret was safe. They thought no one would ever know what they had done to his parachute. They thought this would be the last time they ever saw him alive. Keanu didn't know it yet, but the moment he reached for his cord, the truth of their betrayal would reveal itself. For now, though, he soared downward, full of hope, full of trust, completely blind to the danger that had been planted on his back. It was the calm before the storm, the innocent joy before terror, the final heartbeat before everything changed forever. Keanu dropped into the open sky, his arms spread wide as the wind roared in his ears. For a few seconds, it was everything he had imagined. The rush of air against his face, the feeling of flying without wings, the endless blue all around him. It was freedom like no other. His body cut through the air as the world below slowly grew bigger. The green fields and tiny houses far beneath him looked like they belonged on a map, small and harmless. His heart pounded with excitement. His smile stretched wide as he thought, this was the moment he had been waiting for. He counted the seconds in his head just like the instructor had taught him. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was almost time to pull the cord. His hand reached down to the strap, confident, steady. He pulled hard, but nothing happened. The smile froze on his face. For a split second, his mind didn't understand. Maybe he had pulled too soon. Maybe he had done something wrong. He tried again, harder this time, his fingers gripping the handle with force. Still nothing. The parachute didn't open. A chill shot through his body. The rushing wind that had felt exciting a moment ago now felt like a scream in his ears. The ground below was coming closer and closer. His breaths grew faster, his chest tightened. He pulled again, desperate now. Nothing. His parachute refused to open. A voice inside his head whispered the truth he didn't want to hear. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. His training echoed faintly in his mind. Every skydiver had an emergency chute, a backup in case the main one failed. But what were the chances of the main chute not working? The instructors had said it almost never happened. Unless someone had made it happen. His eyes widened as the thought hit him. His so-called friends. The ones who had smiled too wide, whispered too much, distracted him when he checked. His straps. Could it be them? Could they really have done this to him? The air felt colder now, sharper against his skin. His body spun slightly in the freefall, his arms flailing as he tried to steady himself. The world below was no longer a peaceful picture, but a deadly reminder of how close he was to death. Fear gripped his heart, but along with fear came anger. If they had tampered with his gear, if they had wanted him gone, then he was not just fighting for his life, and he was fighting against betrayal. He reached for the reserve chute, his hands shaking as the wind tore at him. Every second felt like an hour, every heartbeat a hammer pounding in his ears. His vision blurred with panic, but he forced himself to focus. Not yet, not like this, he thought. He wasn't going to end his story falling helplessly from the sky. He would survive, he had to. He wanted to see their faces when he landed, wanted to see their smiles vanish when they realized their plan had failed, but his fingers slipped on the strap. His body twisted again, spinning as the earth below raced closer. He gritted his teeth, fighting the terror clawing at him. He remembered the instructor's voice. Stay calm. Don't lose control. Trust your training. He forced himself to breathe, to push away the panic just enough to try again. His hand found the handle for the reserve. He tugged, but it caught for a moment. His breath stopped. Another tug. Harder this time. Still falling. Still spinning. But now with a tiny thread of hope. He pulled again. The strongest pull he had ever given, praying it would work. In his mind, he could see his friends laughing inside the plane, thinking this would be his end. He could almost hear them whispering, "He'll never make it." The thought filled him with fire. He would make it. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him gone. The seconds were slipping away. The fields below were no longer toy-sized, but growing bigger, sharper. The details of trees and rivers becoming clearer with every passing heartbeat. He imagined the impact, the pain, the sudden end. But then he shook the thought away. No, not him. Not today. He had too much left to do, too much life left to live, and he would not let betrayal decide his fate. He yanked the handle one more time, gritting his teeth as the strap burned against his palm. His heart raced, his mind screamed. For a moment nothing happened and the world seemed to stop. His breath caught, his chest froze. Then, with a sudden jerk, something burst open above him. His body was pulled upward, hard, the fall slowing, with violent force. Relief flooded him so fast he almost cried. The reserve chute had opened. He was alive, but even as his body steadied, swinging gently in the air, his eyes burned with fury. He now knew the truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. Someone had wanted him dead. His so-called friends were no friends at all. They had betrayed him in the worst way possible. And now, as he drifted safely toward the ground, one thought repeated in his mind like a vow. When his feet touched the earth again, they would be the ones afraid. Keanu's heart was still hammering inside his chest as the reserve parachute carried him down slowly. The rush of almost dying was still heavy in his body. His hands shook on the straps, his breath came out sharp, and his mind kept replaying the moment when the main chute refused to open. Again and again he saw himself pulling the cord, felt the panic rising, heard the roar of the wind. It wasn't a mistake. He knew it now. Someone had touched his gear. Someone had wanted this to happen. As he floated lower, the laughter of his friends inside the plane returned to his mind. He thought about their strange smiles, the whispers he had ignored, the way they had distracted him when he was checking his equipment. One of them had even patted him on the shoulder, telling him to relax while standing close to his bag. He had brushed it off back then, but now it all made sense. That wasn't friendship. That wasn't support. That was betrayal, pure and cruel. His chest grew heavy with anger. These weren't strangers. They were people he had trained with, shared meals with, trusted with his life. And they had chosen to throw all of that away, just to see him fall from the sky like a broken bird. The thought stung worse than the near death itself. A parachute failing by accident would have been terrifying, but betrayal made it personal. It wasn't fate trying to kill him. It was people he had once called friends. The ground was drawing closer, but his mind was far from calm. He could already picture their faces when they landed and saw him alive. They had probably expected to find nothing but broken silence on the earth below. Instead, they would see him walking toward them, breathing, standing. They would see the man they tried to kill, and they would know their secret wasn't safe anymore. That thought gave him strength. He wasn't just surviving. He was rising. From their trap, memories rushed through him as he drifted down. He remembered small signs he had ignored. The jealous tone in one friend's voice when Keanu succeeded in training. The mocking jokes another had made about him being too perfect. He remembered the night one of them had argued with him over money, the cold glare in his eyes. At the time, Keanu had thought it was nothing serious, just normal tension. Now looking back, every memory felt darker. These weren't random accidents of character. They had been warning signs, hints that hatred had been growing. The closer he got to the ground, the more clear his decision became. He would not act like a victim. He would not break down or beg for answers. No, he would face them with calm, with silence that would strike fear deeper than any shouting could. They expected him to vanish today. Instead, he would return like a shadow they could not escape. He would let them live with the fear of being exposed, with the fear of what he might do next. As the parachute swayed above him, Keanu clenched his fists. His arms ached from the pull of the straps, his muscles sore from the tension of the fall. But pain only sharpened his thoughts. He imagined their laughter turning to silence, their eyes widening, their hearts dropping into their stomachs, when they realized their failure. The betrayal that almost killed him would not break him. It would give him power. He had survived death itself. What could they possibly do to him now? The earth was close now, the trees tall and sharp beneath him. He guided the chute carefully, aiming for the open field nearby. His boots brushed against the grass, and with a final tug he landed, rolling to absorb the impact. His knees bent, his hands pressed into the dirt. He was alive. Every breath that filled his lungs was proof that their plan had failed. He stood slowly, his body trembling not from weakness, but from the fire of knowing the truth. Above him, the plane circled back, his so-called friends preparing for their own jumps. They had no idea what was waiting for them on the ground. Keanu wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to accuse them right away. He would let them see him standing strong, alive, watching. That would be enough to plant fear in their hearts. Their betrayal had failed, and now they were the ones who should be afraid. Keanu walked a few steps into the field, stretching his arms, calming his breath. The parachute dragged behind him in the grass, fluttering like a broken flag. He looked Up at the sky where tiny figures dropped one by one, his betrayers descending toward the same ground he now stood on. He wondered if they were still laughing, still confident in their plan. That laughter would vanish soon, very soon, and as he waited for them to land, his anger settled into something sharper, colder. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about teaching them what betrayal cost. They had tried to take his life. Instead, they had given him something stronger than life, a reason to make them fear every step they took around him. Keanu smiled faintly, not with joy, but with resolve. He had survived the sky. Now the real storm was about to begin. Keanu's boots pressed into the soft grass as he steadied himself after landing, his body still buzzing with the shock of what had happened in the sky. The reserve chute swayed gently behind him, dragging like a long shadow across the ground. His breathing was uneven, his chest rising and falling as he tried to calm himself. But no matter how deeply he inhaled, the truth clawed at his mind. Someone had tried to kill him. It wasn't fate. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't an accident. It was betrayal. High above, the others were still in the air, falling toward the same earth that had welcomed him safely. Their tiny bodies cut across the sky like dark dots against the blue. Keanu stared at them with narrowed eyes, his hands clenched at his sides. He thought of their smirks, the way they had clapped his back before the jump, the whispers they had shared, the false cheer in their voices. Every detail now burned in his memory like fire. He knew without doubt that they had done it. They had sabotaged his parachute. The anger inside him grew hotter with every passing second. At first, fear had ruled his heart when the chute refused to open. But now that fear had been replaced with something stronger. He wasn't the victim. He wasn't the one who would be broken. No, they were the ones who had made a mistake. They thought he wouldn't survive. They thought the sky would swallow him. But he was still here. And now, the power shifted. Now, they would face him. The wind around him grew quieter as he stepped forward across the open field. Each step grounded him more. Each heartbeat steadied his resolve. He replayed his training in his mind, how he had fought to stay calm in the air, how he had forced his hands to pull the reserve chute even when his vision blurred from panic. That fight for life had hardened him, and as he thought of it, he realized something important. If he could survive death itself, he could survive anything. No betrayal, no plot, no enemy could defeat him. He had faced the sky and lived. That made him stronger than all of them combined. He raised his eyes, again to the sky. The first of his so-called friends was nearing the ground, guiding the parachute to the landing zone. Keanu's lips curled into a thin smile. What would the man think when he saw Keanu standing there, alive? Would his grin freeze? Would fear crawl across his face? Keanu wanted to see it. He wanted to watch the truth strike them like lightning. They had gambled with his life. And now the game had changed. The reserve chute flapped in the wind behind him, but Keanu ignored it. His mind was sharp, clear. He remembered the words of his instructor during training. The real test is not in the jump, but in how you face the unexpected. Keanu had faced the unexpected and conquered it. That thought filled him with fire. He wasn't just a survivor. He was proof that betrayal could be turned into strength. And strength was something his enemies had never expected him to use against them. The first friend landed a few meters away, his boots digging into the dirt, his body swaying as he pulled at the cords of his parachute. His eyes lifted, and there was Keanu, standing tall, alive. The man froze, his jaw tightening, his eyes flickering with something that wasn't joy or relief. It was shock. Keanu could almost hear the man's thoughts. How? How is he alive? Keanu didn't speak. He only stared, letting silence weigh heavier than any words. The second and third landed shortly after, both lifting their heads, both stopping in their tracks when they saw him. Their faces drained of color, their laughter gone. For a moment, none of them moved. It was as if the air had turned solid between them, pressing down on their shoulders, suffocating them with the truth. Keanu should not be alive, but he was, and that was the nightmare they had never prepared for. His heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. Calmness was his weapon now. He wanted them to see that he wasn't shaken, that he wasn't broken, that their attempt had only made him stronger. He wanted them to feel fear not from his anger but from his silence, from the unknown. Because the unknown was always scarier than the known. And in their hearts, fear was already spreading. The last two landed, pulling off their helmets slowly, their eyes locked on him. None of them dared to step closer. None of them dared to smile. Keanu could see their hands twitching, their breaths uneven, their bodies stiff as if preparing to defend themselves. They looked less like friends now, and more like cornered animals waiting for the predator to strike. And Keanu, the man they had tried to destroy, was the predator. The smallest of the group stammered, It wasn't all of us." His voice shook, his eyes darting wildly. In that moment, they turned against each other. The bond they had shared in their betrayal cracked under the weight of fear. Each one was ready to blame the other, to push the guilt away from themselves. Keanu watched quietly, his expression calm, but inside he felt something cold and certain. Their unity was broken. Their trust in each other had crumbled. Betrayal, once directed at him, was now tearing them apart. The wind picked up, rustling the grass around them. Keanu stood like stone, unmoving, while they shifted uncomfortably, whispering excuses, pointing eyes at one another. He let them unravel. He didn't need to say more. Their guilt was eating them alive, and the longer he stayed silent, the deeper it dug into their hearts. One of them rubbed his hands together nervously, another clenched his jaw, and the tallest kept looking over his shoulder as though expecting punishment to come from the shadows. Keanu finally spoke again, his voice low and even. "I know what you did." That was all. 4 words. Nothing more. But those 4 words were enough to shatter the last of their defenses. One man's knees buckled slightly. Another turned pale as chalk. Their fear filled the air, heavy and thick, and Keanu let it sit there, knowing it was stronger than any threat he could make. They didn't know what he would do next. They only knew that he was alive, and that was enough to terrify them. He took another step closer, then stopped. His eyes scanned them one last time before he turned slightly, looking toward the horizon. He didn't need to act now. He didn't need revenge at this moment. The seed of fear was already planted, and it would grow inside them every day. Every time they looked at him, every time they heard his voice, every time they remembered that jump, they would feel the weight of what they had done. And that fear would follow them. Keanu turned back to them, his face calm, his voice steady. "Live with it." That was all he said before walking past them, his shoulders strong, his steps unshaken. The men stood frozen, their hearts pounding, their eyes wide. None of them followed. None of them spoke. They only watched him walk away, their bodies stiff with fear. In that moment, they understood that Keanu's survival was their curse. He didn't need to punish them. Their own fear would do it for him. As the sun sank lower and the shadows stretched long across the field, Keanu knew he had won. Not just his life, but something more powerful. Control. He had turned their betrayal into their prison. And for the first time since the jump, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He had survived the sky, and now, he had made them afraid of the ground. Keanu's footsteps were steady as he walked across the field, leaving the group of men standing behind him in silence. The air was heavy, and the only sound was the soft rustle of grass beneath his boots and the faint flapping of parachutes settling into the earth. He could feel their eyes on his back, wide and filled with fear. They didn't follow him. They didn't dare. For the first time, the ones who had thought themselves powerful were trembling, and the man they had tried to destroy was the one in control. Inside, Keanu was still burning. The memory of the failed parachute wasn't going to leave him anytime soon. He could still feel the way his stomach had dropped when the cord refused to work, could still hear the wind roaring past his ears as the ground rushed up to meet him. That fear was real, but so was the strength it had given him. He had faced death, looked it straight in the eye, and survived. That survival gave him a power they could never take away, and he knew it. Behind him, the men whispered to each other. Their voices were low, shaky, like children caught in a crime. "What do we do?" one of them hissed. Another snapped back. "Just keep quiet." Their panic leaked through every word. Keanu didn't need to listen closely. He could hear the fear in their tone. They were no longer united. The betrayal they had shared had already begun to split them apart. Each one wanted to blame the other. Each one was afraid Keanu would single them out. And that fear was worse than anything Keanu could say. He stopped walking and turned his head slightly, just enough for them to see his face in the fading light. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. That single look was enough to silence them. They froze like statues, their mouths closing instantly. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to threaten them. His silence, his calmness, was punishment enough. They knew he had survived their trap, and now they didn't know what he would do with that knowledge. The unknown was their enemy now. The tallest one swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Keanu, listen, man, it was just a mistake. No one wanted you dead." His words fell flat. Even his companions looked at him with disgust, knowing the lie sounded weak. Keanu didn't answer. He simply tilted his head, studying the man as if he could see straight through him. The man shifted on his feet, sweat dripping down his temple, his own words betraying him. Lies always sounded small in the face of truth. Another tried to speak, his voice trembling. "We didn't think it would..." But he cut himself off quickly, realizing his tongue had betrayed him too. His half-finished sentence was enough to confirm what Keanu already knew. They had thought about it, they had planned it, and they had done it with full intention. Keanu's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. He didn't need to. Their own words were destroying them faster than he ever could. The sun was sinking lower, shadows stretching across the field like long, dark fingers. Keanu finally stepped, closer again, his boots crunching softly against the dirt. Each step made them retreat slightly, their bodies stiff, their faces pale. When he stopped just a few feet away, he let his eyes move from one to another, holding their gaze until they looked away in shame. He wanted them to feel it, to carry this weight forever, the knowledge that they had failed. Then, in a voice low and steady, Keanu spoke. "You thought I wouldn't live, but here I am." The words were simple, yet they struck like lightning. None of them could reply. Their throats tightened, their breaths quickened. Keanu could see it, the fear spreading through them like cracks in glass. One wrong word, one wrong move, and they would shatter completely. He let the silence return after his words, heavier now, pressing down on them until the weight of their guilt nearly crushed them. One of the men, unable to handle it, dropped his gaze to the ground and muttered, "We didn't know you had a reserve." It slipped out like a confession, his voice barely above a whisper. The others turned on him instantly, their faces twisted with anger and fear. "Shut up," one of them hissed, but it was too late. Keanu had heard it. His suspicion was now truth. He knew they had sabotaged his main parachute, and he knew they had counted on him not surviving. The man's slip of the tongue had exposed them all. Keanu took a slow breath, controlling the storm inside him. He wanted to lash out, to demand answers, to ask them why they had done it. But he stopped himself. Answers didn't matter. Their reasons, whatever they were, could never justify what they had tried to do. What mattered now was the fear they would live with, the fear that would never leave them. He didn't need their words. He needed their silence, their guilt, their shame. That would be the punishment they could never escape. The sky was darker now, painted with streaks of purple and red. Keanu turned slightly, his eyes drifting toward the horizon as though the matter was finished. Then he looked back at them, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the night. "From this day on, remember one thing," he said slowly. "I know what you did." His words sank into them like nails, pinning them where they stood. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They only stared, pale and shaken. Keanu turned and walked away again, his shadow stretching long behind him. Every step he took made their fear grow. because they didn't know if this was the end or only the beginning. Would he expose them? Would he take revenge? Would he wait and strike when they least expected it? The uncertainty was torture, and that was exactly what Keanu wanted. They had tried to end his life, but instead they had given him something greater, the power to haunt theirs. As the night settled in, Keanu knew their fear would never fade. Every glance over their shoulders, every moment of silence, every memory of his steady eyes would remind them of this day. They had thought they were powerful when they sabotaged his parachute. But now, powerless and trembling, they were the ones who would live in fear forever. The night had almost fully fallen when Keanu finally left the field behind. The last glow of the sun melted into the horizon, and the sky turned dark, sprinkled with the first stars. His steps were slow but strong, each one carrying the weight of survival. He had walked through death and returned alive, and now he carried more than just the memory of betrayal. He carried the power that came with it. Behind him, the men still stood frozen in the field, trapped in their own fear, unable to move or speak. They had wanted him gone, but now they were the ones who could not escape. As he walked, Keanu's mind burned with images of the fall. He could still feel the violent rush of air, still remember the way the ground seemed to reach for him like claws, still taste the terror when the parachute had failed. And he remembered the laughter before the jump, their smirks, their whispers, their false encouragement. The betrayal was sharper than the wind that had cut across his face in freefall. It wasn't just an attempt on his life. It was the destruction of trust, the shattering of brotherhood. That wound would not heal easily, but strangely it gave him strength. The pain had turned to fire, and the fire made him untouchable. In the distance he could hear them arguing, their voices rising and falling like desperate echoes. They were blaming each other, trying to find someone to carry the guilt. "It wasn't me," one shouted. "You told me to do it," another snapped. Their words carried across the quiet field, but Keanu did not turn back. He didn't need to see them tearing each other apart. Their fear, their guilt, their broken unity. That was his victory. They had tried to break him, but instead, they had broken themselves. Keanu reached a small hill at the edge of the field and stopped. The cool night breeze brushed against his face, calming the storm inside him. He looked back once, his silhouette standing tall against the fading light. They were still there, clustered together like lost children, their shoulders hunched, their heads bowed. They had thought themselves hunters, but now they looked like prey. And Keanu, the man they had tried to erase, was the shadow that haunted them. He spoke softly, his voice carried by the wind, though they were too far to hear clearly. "You wanted me gone," he whispered. "Now you'll live with me in your fear." The words weren't meant for them directly. They were for himself. A vow he made that he would never let betrayal crush him again. From this night on, he would carry the memory not as a wound, but as armor. He would walk through life knowing he had survived the worst and nothing they could do would ever touch him again. The stars grew brighter above, shining down like witnesses to the truth. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment and let the night sink into him. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had faced the end, and he had come back stronger. His so-called friends would never understand that kind of strength. They would only understand the fear of facing him, of waiting for the day when silence would break, when their betrayal would be exposed, or when his revenge, if he ever chose it, would fall on them. He smiled faintly, not out of joy, but out of certainty. They were already punished. Every sleepless night they spent wondering what he might do, every anxious glance over their shoulders, every nervous word they spoke to each other. That was their punishment. They would live with it every day. They would never know when or how the storm they had created might return to them. And that fear, heavier than any blow Keanu could give, was enough. Finally, he turned away from the field and walked into the night. His figure disappeared into the darkness, but his presence remained behind like a ghost. The men stood there long after he was gone, too afraid to move, too shaken to speak. They could not laugh anymore. They could not pretend anymore. Their secret was no longer hidden, and their strength had crumbled. In their hearts they knew the truth. They had tried to kill a man, but instead they had created a nightmare for themselves. Keanu's journey away from the field was quiet, but inside him, his thoughts were loud. He had not only survived betrayal, he had claimed it, turned it into power. He had shown them that he was not a victim but a force, and that was something they could never erase. The memory of the parachute that didn't open, the panic in the sky, the desperate tug of the reserve, all of it became part of him now. He was no longer just Keanu the skydiver. He was Keanu the survivor. Keanu the storm that walked the way Earth. By the time he disappeared into the darkness of the night, the lesson was complete. They had laughed before the jump, confident in their betrayal. Now laughter would never come so easily to them again. Fear would be their shadow, and Keanu would live on, stronger, unbroken, and untouchable. And in the silence of that night, the truth echoed. They had sabotaged his parachute, but now they were the ones afraid.